Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. No one knew when she came, only that she was suddenly there, like a song remembered in the middle of silence. The day had begun like any other in Umuz. Children chasing each other through cracked farm paths, goats bleating lazily near old yam barns, women laughing over baskets of bitter leaf by the river. Life, as the villagers knew it, trickled on like a calm stream, predictable, stubborn, and old. But by midday, when the sun was just beginning to stretch its rays across the western palm groves, the news began to rise from the banks of Mirioka. A woman was sitting near the water. Not washing, not gathering snails, not fetching water, just sitting. Still, her presence was like mist, there, but not quite touchable. She wasn't from Umuocha, nor Nui, nor even far-off Uke, whose traders passed through during yam festivals. Her skin shimmered like bronze caught in candlelight, untouched by the sun, and her wrapper glowed like the last flame of a dying fire. Her hair, impossibly long, flowed past her waist like black silk, and her feet, bare, clean, delicate, didn't match the dusty road she must have walked. She combed her hair slowly, the way one tells a story with every stroke. Some children said they saw her eyes change color under the sun. Others claimed she didn't blink. But what was most unsettling wasn't her beauty, it was her stillness. There was something in the way she didn't move when they laughed, didn't glance when they whispered, as though she already knew the end of a tale that hadn't begun. By evening, half the village had found a reason to walk near the river. Some said they were gathering firewood. Others claimed they had forgotten pineapples in their baskets earlier that morning. The truth was simpler. Curiosity pulled them like a strong tide. Old men with rattling bones leaned on their carved staffs, pretending to talk politics while stealing glances. Women squinted through wrappers tied around their hair, whispering about the strange shine of her skin, her silence, the way the river seemed to ripple beneath her even though no wind stirred. But she did not speak. She only sat, brushed her hair, and sometimes let her fingers trail across the water as though reading a secret written there. By nightfall, when the sun folded its arms and the stars returned to their watch, she rose, silent as mist, and walked into the forest, leaving only a faint floral scent behind. Some swore they saw the trees part for her like servants before royalty. Others said her feet never touched the earth. One hunter, frightened but honest, said she turned to glance at him from the edge of the trees, and he felt a sharp jolt behind his eyes, like memory unearthing something long forgotten. No one dared follow her. Not even the bravest of them. She was not running. She was not hiding. But something about her warned against nearness. In the days that followed, life in Umuz did not return to normal. It simply pretended. The Yam festival came and went with less music, the market square buzzed with less laughter, and even the elders who usually sat under the mango tree during palm wine hour seemed more thoughtful, their conversations shorter. Talk of the woman, whispers mostly, filled the gaps left by laughter. They said she had built a small clay hut near the edge of the forest, though no one saw it being molded or roofed. No craftsman claimed it. No smoke rose from its thatch. Yet there it stood, perfectly shaped, round as a moon, with cowrie shells embedded into the doorframe, and a faint smell of roses and firewood drifting from it. Nobody dared knock. But one day Obinna, the poor cassava farmer whose luck had soured ever since his wife died in childbirth, was seen walking in that direction with a nervous limp and a small calabash tucked under his arm. He returned the next day with new sandals, a fresh wrapper, and eyes that had seen something too wide for words. He no longer borrowed salt from his neighbors. His once leaking roof was suddenly patched, and in a village where even the rich recycled praise names, Obinna now moved like a man crowned with quiet authority. When questioned, he only smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals, and said, "She only speaks when the heart listens." What unsettled the village most was not Obinna's transformation, but how familiar it began to feel. Within a week, Chijioke, the palm wine tapper whose back had begun to bow like an old yam stem, was also seen approaching the hut. 2 days later, he was strutting like a man whose pockets jingled with coins from Lagos. He brought back crates of wine, gave yams to beggars, and began whistling tunes nobody had taught him. Then it was Ikeen, the boy with cracked heels and hunger in his eyes, who vanished for a night and returned with a rooster under one arm and a carved walking stick in the other. The elders remained mute, which was more telling than any sermon. They didn't visit her. They didn't summon her to the square. They only watched, like vultures circling a feast they dare not land on. And yet, every man who visited her seemed calmer, richer, changed, but never in a way anyone could explain. The air around her hut felt thicker each day, like honey laced with thunder. Still, the scent of flowers always danced at the edge. And her voice, no one had heard it yet, but they began to speak of it anyway, as if the idea of her had grown larger than her presence. A storm was stirring beneath the surface of Yumu's quiet, but no one knew it yet. For now, the men kept walking toward her door, and the village kept pretending not to notice. The whispers grew teeth, and soon the village fed them. Obina's new wealth had spread like oil on white cloth, unstoppable, staining everything it touched. He had been known as a man of little fortune, someone whose compound once looked like the back of a chewed coconut, dry and forgotten. Now a small pond glistened near his yam barn, his compound swept clean daily, and chickens strutted across his threshold like they belonged to royalty. His neighbors, the ones who once lent him cassava flour and scoffed behind his back, now lowered their voices in his presence. Obina had become a puzzle that even the elders dared not piece together. The women whispered about the softness in his voice, how his laughter had changed. It no longer rattled with hunger, it now flowed like warm palm wine, rich and slow. When asked where the sudden blessings came from, he gave no stories. He simply said, "She sees what you carry in your spirit, and she decides." No one knew what that meant, but it was said with such finality that even the boldest tongues dared not push further. What was most unsettling wasn't the change in Obina's fortune. It was the way he seemed to drift in and out of conversations, as if his mind danced on invisible threads no one else could see. He was present, yet somewhere far, far away. And each morning his compound still smelled faintly of roses and something ancient, something like rain hitting dry bones. Chijioke followed next, but his story twisted itself differently. A widower with 3 small children and hands hardened by years of climbing raffia trees, Chijioke had lived with the quiet grief of a man who had buried too much laughter. He wasn't known for dreams, only survival. But one evening, just as the sun melted into the earth, he was seen walking toward the edge of the forest, his machete strapped behind him and a carved gourd in his hand. Some said he was drawn by Obina's silence, others believed he had seen the woman in his dreams. Whatever called him, he didn't return till the cock crowed the next morning. And when he did, there was no machete, no gourd, only a quiet strength in his eyes that hadn't been there before. By midday his compound had new rafters, thatched walls reinforced. Clothes he once wore thin like old proverbs were replaced with rich, colorful wrappers he couldn't have afforded even in his youth. His children now ran through the compound in sandals, giggling without the weight of hunger in their bellies. And though Chijioke said little, he began to sing again while tapping palm trees, songs his wife once loved, songs he hadn't dared sing since she was lowered into the red soil. Yet behind that new strength, behind the eyes that now looked toward the horizon, something remained veiled. He didn't speak of her, but when the moon was high and the breeze stirred the leaves, those near his hut said they heard him whispering softly. Not prayers, not chants, just a name repeated gently, as though calling a lover who lived in the wind. The village didn't need the town crier to know something strange had rooted itself in Yumu's. Ikeen, the boy once mocked for wearing a shirt that had more holes than cloth, had vanished for a night and reappeared like a tale retold by firelight, familiar yet strange. His return was not marked by possessions but presence. He walked with his head held high, no longer dodging gazes, no longer clutching his stomach in quiet hunger. In his hand he carried a carved staff, no ordinary wood, but smooth and pale, with engravings that none in the village could decipher. It was said he spoke to it when alone, and that it glowed under moonlight. He bought 2 goats, not with naira, but with cowries, old ones, the kind no one had seen in use for decades. When asked where he found them, he simply said, "She gave them back to me." No one knew what that meant. Some laughed, others watched him from behind shuttered windows. But the elders did not laugh. They watched the path to her hut with eyes wide as calabashes and hearts heavy with memories too dangerous to stir. The air around Yumu's had begun to change. It was subtle, like the early winds of Harmattan, sharp only if you were still enough to feel them. Birds avoided the trees near the forest's edge. Crickets stopped chirping at certain hours. The village well, once sweet, now tasted faintly of something metallic at dawn. And yet, despite the strangeness, despite the silence, the scent of flowers near her hut never faded. It lingered like perfume on the memory of a woman who smiled without smiling. Men talked less but thought more. Curiosity pulled at them like tides tied to an invisible moon. Even those who claimed disbelief began to wander near the edge of the forest when the sun dipped low. They didn't admit they were searching. They simply walked, paused, and turned back, but their feet always carried them closer each time. One evening, Madhu, known for his arrogance and unmatched hunting skills, stood near the path leading to her hut, arms crossed, face unreadable. He scoffed at the stories, called the others weak, said poverty made men fools. And yet, as the shadows stretched long and the trees whispered secrets in rustling tones, he took a step forward, then another, until the forest swallowed him. He returned late that night, drenched in sweat and speaking in proverbs. A man who drinks from a well must first ask who dug it, he said to no one in particular. The next day, his door remained shut. His compound, once loud with dogs, apprentices, and laughter, was silent. No smoke from his kitchen, no sign of his tools. And though his wealth remained untouched, Madhu himself had vanished. The third man to go. The villagers didn't speak of it directly, but fear now crept like ants into their beds. Something was feeding on their desire, and no one knew how to name it. Yet deep inside, they all knew the truth. The woman by the river was no ordinary visitor. She had come not with words, but with mirrors. Each man only saw what he desired most. And those who stared too long never looked away again. The absence of Madhu struck the village like the quiet after a thunderclap, nothing said but everything shaken. His compound, once alive with shouts, pounding pestles, and hunting dogs, now lay in a strange stillness. The animals no longer barked. His apprentices whispered, and eventually stopped showing up. Even the trees in his yard swayed differently, as though bent under the weight of something unseen. The women of Yumuz began to carry their water in silence, their laughter now caged in their throats. Conversations dried up like Harmattan streams. Even the children, usually loud as market-day gongs, played nearer to home, their eyes constantly searching the paths their fathers once walked. Madhu's hut door remained open for 3 days, swinging with the breeze like a mouth trying to speak, but unsure of its voice. His belongings remained untouched. Fine wrappers hung behind his bedpost, calabashes of palm oil sealed tightly, a small bag of coins beside his pillow. But Madhu himself was nowhere to be found. There were no footprints leaving his compound, no sign of struggle, not even a disturbed blade of grass. Just emptiness. And the strange part was, no one dared to close his door. They left it open like a wound, fearing what might happen if they tried to seal it shut. His mother, a once proud and fierce woman named Ugboma, stopped coming to the square. She sat by his empty stool in the evenings, humming a war song she hadn't sung since the death of her husband. Some say they saw her whispering into her cooking pot. Others claimed she began to leave food by the tree in front of his hut. But even she would not walk toward the forest. The fear now ran deeper than whispers. It rooted itself in bones, gnawed at courage, and bloomed in the spaces where certainty once lived. The men who had once lined the palm-lined benches with boastful voices now drank with eyes that darted sideways. No one mentioned the woman near the forest anymore, not directly. They referred to her as the presence or the still one. Yet, their silence did nothing to lessen her hold. The air near the forest edge grew heavier by the day, filled with the scent of crushed petals and something less pleasant, like the dampness of forgotten graves. Those who lived closest to the path claimed to hear things at night, soft footsteps that didn't match the weight of a human body, humming that stopped the moment you tried to listen closely, and a sound like gentle crying carried on the breeze. Still no one moved away. The fear had a strange effect. It froze the village, made them stick to their routines as though repetition could bring safety. And in the midst of it all, Obinna, Chijioke, and Akin, though absent, remained physically present. Their homes still stood, their livestock still fed, their things untouched. Some villagers started to believe they weren't gone, only elsewhere. Somewhere near. Somewhere not easily explained. And yet, despite their vanishing, others still visited the hut. Silently. At night. Their names were never spoken, but the path never stayed unused for long. It was as if the forest reached out to the ones who dared not speak their desires aloud. It was the women who finally began to see the pattern, not because they were smarter, but because they had watched the men they loved disappear without leaving a shadow. Neka, Obinna's sister, had once laughed like a river in the rainy season. Now she moved like someone dancing barefoot on broken glass. She counted the days since her brother walked toward the forest. 53. Every morning, she marked another line on the mud wall beside the hearth with charcoal. She began to notice things others ignored. The ground near the clay hut no longer held dew in the morning, even when the rest of the village did. Birds avoided the roof. A set of small white flowers bloomed only at night near the hut's rear wall, flowers that did not match anything from Yumu's soil. She shared these things with Adaobi, a widow whose husband had vanished years ago in a similar, whispered fashion, though back then they'd blamed it on bandits from across the river. Adaobi listened, nodded, and said something that chilled Neka to the bone. Some women wear wrappers. Others wear time. They began watching the path from a distance, not to confront, but to understand. And what they saw disturbed them more than any ghost story. Men were still going. Not just the poor or the desperate, but men with full homes, laughter-filled compounds, and pots of soup boiling over warm fires. They weren't being lured. They were choosing. One by one, quietly, they walked to her. Not as victims, but as pilgrims. Then came the night of the crying tree. It was just past the full moon, when the tree near Madu's compound began to make noises. At first, it sounded like a creaking branch, the kind stirred by wind. But there was no wind. Then came soft sobbing, unmistakably human, but muffled, as though buried in the trunk. By morning, the bark of the tree had darkened, and a line of ants marched up its spine toward a knot in the wood that looked disturbingly like an eye. That same day, Amaka, Chijioke's eldest daughter, collapsed while pounding yam. She woke hours later, muttering about a woman with silver feet and a tongue made of smoke. She couldn't remember anything else. Adaobi decided enough was enough. That evening, under the old Irako at the village's western border, she called the other women, those who had lost brothers, sons, lovers. They came without needing explanation. In their eyes were questions no elder had answered. In their hands were kitchen knives, grinding stones, and dried herbs passed down from mothers who had once battled things that lived behind veils. They didn't go to the hut that night. Not yet. But they began to prepare. Not for war, but for truth. Whatever lay behind that floral scent and soft hairbrush strokes would no longer remain unspoken. Something had been awakened in the forest. Something ancient. And the women were no longer willing to remain its silent witnesses. The old women say that when a spirit begins to cry, the ground listens first. It was on the 7th night after Amaka's collapse that the first true sign appeared. Beneath the light of a crooked moon, Adaobi saw it while returning from the stream. A strange pattern of ash coiled in front of her compound, shaped not by any human hand. It wasn't wind. Wind didn't leave precise spirals. It wasn't children. Children didn't move this quietly. She didn't scream. Instead, she reached down, touched the ashes with her thumb, and whispered an old phrase her mother used when the forest spoke. If a path has no end, walk it backward. She wiped the ash across her forehead, left her water pot at the doorstep, and went to find Neka. By the time the cock crowed, 5 women were gathered in Neka's kitchen, each one bound to a man who had disappeared. They weren't loud. They didn't cry or chant or tear their wrappers in grief. They simply sat and listened, their eyes fixed on the pot that sat on the fire, even though no one stirred it. In the center of the group, Mama Ezen, the oldest among them, sucked air through her teeth and finally spoke. What you call a woman is not always flesh, and what you call kindness can wear the face of hunger. She turned to Adaobi. If the earth has accepted her, then it is the earth we must question. By afternoon the next day, while the village remained distracted with preparations for the monthly market, the women returned to the forest path. Not to the hut, not yet, but near enough to see. They stayed hidden among tall elephant grasses, careful not to stir even the breeze with their presence. And there it was again, the unmistakable scent. Flowers. Sweet. Heavy. But this time, beneath it, something else lingered, an undertone like smoldering cloth or bitter bark. Then they saw her. She came out just before dusk, stepping slowly from the hut like the last breath of day. She wore a white wrapper too bright for natural dye, and her hair spilled behind her like a waterfall made of midnight. In her hand was a small calabash with a single red string tied around its neck. She placed it on the ground before her, bowed to it, and began to hum. The sound was neither joyous nor mournful. It was something in between, like a memory being unwrapped. The hum made the women freeze, not from fear but recognition. Each one, in the silence of her soul, felt she'd heard it before. In a dream. In the wind. In the echo of their missing ones. Then, as if sensing she was being watched, the woman paused. She did not look toward the women hiding. She simply turned to her hut and whispered into the doorway, "You are not forgotten." The moment cracked like a gourd underfoot. The forest, for one impossible breath, stopped moving. No bird call. No rustle. Nothing. Then she vanished back into the hut, and the grasses released the women as if the earth itself exhaled. That night, not a single one of them slept soundly. Neka tossed and turned, her mind looping through the hum, the calabash, and the way the woman's feet made no sound against the earth. She kept picturing Obina's face, his silence, his retreating back, the way he had started to hum just days before he disappeared. Adeobi sat by her window the entire night, grinding dry leaves with her bare hands, whispering incantations her grandmother once taught her to tame lightning. Mama Ezen, however, did not stay home. She went to the shrine near the old baobab, one most had forgotten, its priest long gone, its idols covered in dust and spiders. She lit 3 small fires, one for each of the vanished men she had blessed during childbirth. The flames sputtered and danced, then rose in perfect sync, tall and blue. A sign, she later said, that the spirits were listening again. But even they were unsure. The next morning, as the women gathered again, Adeobi arrived carrying a worn-out cloth bundle. Inside were 6 small cowrie shells, a mirror, and a black thread. She placed them on the floor without saying a word. The women looked at one another. No one asked where the items came from. Some truths are better left unexplained until they demand their names be spoken. Together, they understood what needed to be done, not with violence, not with threats, but with knowledge. To fight something born of silence, they had to listen louder than they ever had before. It was not courage that led them to the hut the next night. It was memory. Each woman carried one, a whispered promise from a lover, the last laughter of a son, the quiet nod of a husband before he vanished. Memory is stronger than fear when properly fed. The forest opened for them like it had for the men, though it did not welcome them with the same warmth. The path felt colder, the wind unsure. At the hut's entrance they paused. There was no guard, no barrier, only a presence, thick as boiled yam water, ancient as stone. Mama Ezen stepped forward first, whispered a prayer that tasted like salt on her tongue, and drew a line on the earth with her walking stick. Adeobi followed, then Neka. One by one they entered, not into the hut, but into the circle of soil and petals that surrounded it. In the center, laid gently like a sleeping infant, were 6 clay masks. Each face carried a different expression: sorrow, longing, joy, confusion, rage, peace. Beneath each, a string of cowries formed a perfect oval. At the center of the circle, a 7th mask faced downward. No features, just smooth clay. The nameless one. The moment their shadows touched the circle, the door of the hut creaked open. Not pushed, not forced. It opened on its own. And from within, a voice unlike any they had ever known said softly, "You should not have come. But now that you have, do not lie to yourselves. You didn't come for answers. You came for what you already know." No one moved. The voice that emerged from within the hut wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to pin every breath to the chest. It was neither the voice of a girl nor that of a woman. It was both and neither. It was old but not aged. Soft but not gentle. It sounded like a breeze that had passed through too many tombs, a whisper that had witnessed the undoing of men. The women stood in the circle of clay masks, each one suddenly aware of how loud their own heartbeats had become. Adeobi tried to speak, but found her lips resisting her. Neka reached for her wrapper's edge, more for grounding than modesty, and Mama Ezen closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in remembering. The hut door continued to creak, but never fully opened. The darkness inside moved like it had depth, like it went on longer than a room should. Then the woman stepped into the doorway. She was barefoot, but her ankles were wrapped in tiny silver rings that shimmered without catching any light. Her eyes were darker than charcoal, but reflected like water. She did not smile, yet her face did not scowl either. She stared at the women, not with challenge, but with something closer to recognition. "You have carried questions like baskets of hot coals," she said. "But you did not come to ask. You came to accuse." Her gaze fell upon Mama Ezen. "You carry the oldest grief." Then to Neka. "And you carry guilt you call love." Then Adeobi. "You think your loss makes you worthy to judge mine?" The women did not answer immediately. Adeobi stepped forward with deliberate care, holding the small mirror that had been part of the cloth bundle. She placed it gently on the ground between them and the masks. "We came because we remember," she said, voice steady. "And memory must be honored, even when it trembles." The woman in the doorway blinked slowly. Her face did not soften, but something in the wind around the hut changed. Its scent now tinged with something nostalgic, like the smell of rain before the first drop touches the earth. "What is it you think I have taken?" she asked, though it was not a question. Her eyes moved toward the masks, then rested on the blank one in the center. "They came here with their own hearts. I did not summon them. I answered their knocking." Mama Ezen's voice came next, low, cracked, but sharp. "We do not question what they sought. We question what they became. Men do not abandon fire for shadow unless they are promised warmth." The woman's mouth twitched, just slightly. "Warmth," she echoed. "Is that what they told you? That I gave them warmth?" She stepped forward then, and for the first time, her feet touched the circle. The masks trembled, not violently, but enough that dust lifted from their surfaces. The calabash she had set down earlier was now in her hand again. She opened it. Inside was nothing, at least nothing the eye could see. But the women staggered backward as a sudden wave of emotion hit them. Grief, lust, relief, hunger, peace, regret, all in one breath. The air thickened, as if the calabash had opened not an object but a door. "What you feel," the woman said, "is what they left behind." Her voice carried no apology. "Each of them came to me with something too heavy to carry. I did not take it. I held it. And when they chose not to return, it was because the weight they carried felt lighter here than what awaited them outside." The women listened, but listening felt like sinking. The forest around them seemed to pulse with her words. Trees leaned in slightly. The breeze moved in circles. From somewhere distant, a single bird called out, a low, mournful tone, as if echoing the ache that now sat heavy in all their chests. Neka found her voice next. "But if they are still alive, let them return. Let them choose again." The woman turned her eyes on her, and this time, the sharpness in her stare cut deep. "Would you still want him?" she asked, "if he chose peace without you?" The question curled around Neka like a snake. She did not answer. Could not. The woman stepped fully outside the hut now, standing among the masks. Her wrapper brushed the edge of the blank one, and it shifted slightly. "You see me as the cause, but I am only the mirror. I show them what they've hidden from themselves. Some come for wealth, but most come to forget." She looked down at the seventh mask. "This one is not yet chosen. It waits." The women stood uncertain, emotions twisted like unripe plantain, bitter, tangled, confusing. Adeobi approached the seventh mask, slowly, kneeling beside it without touching. "If it has not chosen, then there is still time," she said. The woman nodded, but it wasn't the nod of agreement. It was the kind given to a child asking if stars can be caught in their hands. "Time is not yours to measure here," she replied. "This place bends differently. A day here can be a year there. Or a moment. What you call absence, they call awakening." Mama Ezen bent to examine the mask and noticed faint cracks across its surface, like something within was pressing to emerge. She placed her palm near it. It was warm. "So what must we do?" she asked, almost in a whisper. The woman took a step back and gestured toward the calabash. "One of you must enter. Only one. Not to demand, not to fight, but to listen." Her eyes scanned them slowly. "But be warned. Once you cross the threshold, you carry not only your own memory, but theirs. All of them. And not all memories wish to be remembered." The wind paused, waiting for their answer. No sound came from the village. The world beyond the clearing had become a forgotten thing. Then, without speaking, Adeobi stood tall. Her eyes were dry, her steps measured. She reached for the calabash and, with both hands, lifted it. The woman did not stop her. Instead, she stepped aside. The hut's door, still slightly ajar, opened wider, not by force, not by wind, but by invitation. And Adeobi, heart pounding like the feet of masquerades during New Yam dance, crossed into the unknown. The moment Adeobi stepped across the threshold, the air folded inward, like a book closing its final page. The other women watched as the hut swallowed her without ceremony. No lightning, no roar, no flutter of curtains, just a silence so complete that it seemed to erase even the memory of sound. Within the doorway, Adeobi was not greeted by darkness, but by an overwhelming presence of stillness. It felt alive, as if the walls breathed with memory, each grain of clay remembering something ancient and sacred. She held the calabash tight to her chest, its warmth now pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. There were no torches, no furnishings, no visible windows. The space stretched unnaturally, deeper than the size of the hut should have allowed. A faint mist clung to the floor like forgotten dreams. Shapes moved beyond the fog, neither fully human nor entirely spirit, just flickers, fragments of what used to be. Faces turned but vanished before her gaze could catch their features. Voices drifted through the silence, not words but feelings. Hunger, regret, love, Solitude. Her knees threatened to buckle, but her resolve stood firm. She moved forward, guided not by sight but by a pull, like a name being called across generations. Then she saw him. Obinna. He sat on a flat stone, legs folded beneath him, his face ageless and strange. His eyes held no fear, only the calm of someone who had finally unclenched his fists after holding them for too long. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But he saw her. Adeobi stepped closer, trembling, not from fear but from the weight of everything she now carried. All the women. All the questions. All the aching absences. She dropped to her knees before him, and for a moment she was not a widow, not a searcher, not a vessel for memory, just a woman before a man who had once been her brother's friend, her neighbor, her people's son. "Why didn't you come back?" she asked softly, but her voice echoed around the room as though spoken from every corner of the spirit world. Obinna looked at her as if the answer was too vast for words. He reached toward her, not to touch, but to open his palm, and in it appeared the same flower that had grown near the hut. Petals of blood-red hue, its center pulsing faintly like a quiet heartbeat. "This place," he said finally, "is not an escape. It is a choice. We weren't stolen. We stayed." Adeobi's chest tightened. Behind Obinna, others began to appear. Chijioke, standing behind a veil of mist. Ikeen, leaning against a crooked post that sprouted from the floor like a forgotten tree root. Even Madhu, eyes fierce but empty of the pride that once puffed his chest. None looked trapped. None pleaded. They only watched, as though each held a different version of the truth. "We were broken long before we came to her," Obinna whispered. "She didn't heal us. She reflected us. And when we saw ourselves, some of us couldn't leave." She didn't realize she was crying until her vision blurred. The calabash began to hum in her arms. It vibrated not violently, but with insistence, like a heartbeat remembering a song. She looked down, and in its depths reflections swirled, moments from each of their lives, brief and painful. Chijioke holding his dying wife's hand. Madhu crouched over his father's grave, refusing to weep. Ikeen, alone under a leaking roof, rain soaking the floor he had tried to sweep clean. And Obinna, clutching the tattered cloth his baby was wrapped in before being taken from him by fever. She gasped. She saw it all. The wounds they carried, the burdens they never voiced, the emptiness that had long lived behind their laughter. "Then what do you want from us?" she asked, voice trembling. Obinna looked at her and spoke the words not with sadness but with clarity. "Tell them we didn't leave them. We returned to ourselves." Adeobi nodded, unsure if she was allowed to feel the grief that rushed into her again. Before she could speak again, the hut began to shift. The walls rippled, and the faces faded. The mist thickened, and she could feel herself being lifted, not by hands but by time itself. The space curled inward. The calabash grew cold. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was outside. The sun was beginning to rise. The other women rushed toward her, but stopped just short. Her eyes had changed, deeper, holding echoes. Adeobi held the calabash out. It was no longer warm, no longer humming. Just clay. Simple. Heavy. She did not speak immediately. She turned and looked toward the hut. The door was closed. No footprints. No sound. The scent of flowers had vanished. It was Mama Ezen who broke the silence. "Did they speak?" Adeobi nodded. "They chose." That word hung in the air like a verdict. Neka fell to her knees, her sobs stifled by the back of her hand. The others stood still, unsure of what grief should look like now. Adeobi lowered the calabash and placed it on the earth, directly beside the seventh mask, which had not moved. "They don't want to be mourned," she said quietly. "They want to be understood." The morning light crept across the clearing, softening the sharp edges of sorrow. The forest no longer seemed to watch. It simply breathed. Mama Ezen took the edge of her wrapper and wiped Adeobi's cheeks. "We will carry this, then," she said, "as women always do." No fire was lit. No chants were made. The women turned back toward the village, each step heavier than the last, not because of pain but because they now knew the shape of what they'd lost. Behind them the masks remained, still and quiet, as if listening. And in the gentle wind, just for a moment, there was a hum, faint and soft. Then silence. Dear listener, when beauty comes bearing gifts too easy to earn, pause. Not all treasures shine for your good. Some doors open gently, but lead to places your soul may never return from. Let your desires be guided by wisdom, not desperation. Learn to know the difference between blessings and bait. May your heart never be lured into the arms of deception. May your spirit be too wise for the traps dressed in gold. May you never walk blindly into what looks like favor, but is really a curse. May your hands hold only what is truly yours, and may no peace in your life come at the cost of your soul. May the ancestors protect your steps, may your dreams be clean, and may your destiny reject every path that leads to regret. If you believe this, say a loud and joyful amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.